Scott Bell Show.
It is Friday, but tomorrow is almost Earth Muffin Day. We're going to celebrate that in Mirando Farms in Fort Lauderdale. If you want to hang out with RSB and friends, come on down. We've got the links up in the show notes at robertscottbell.com. I don't know where Jack Hunter's going to be, but I know he's here with me right now, and it's always a blast when we get together. The official blogger, campaign blogger for the Ron Paul Run for the Presidency. Jack Hunter, the Southern Avenger, is back. Jack, it's good to have you.
Hi. How you doing, Robert? Always good to be with you.
It is great, man. I tell you what, we've missed you here. Of course, we continue to carry the torch in our own way in the new media, and certainly love to hear all the updates on the inside. We've been talking a lot about the fact that the media, old media, I say, is not reporting on the real story. The delegates are racking up on Ron Paul's favor. There are also attendance issues that are incredible compared to the chosen one, the front runner, as they call him, Mitt Romney, who has some crickets chirping at his events, and Ron Paul's got thousands of people, even in Little Rhode Island.
I tell you what, Robert, I haven't been more excited about the future in general throughout this entire campaign than I think the last 2 weeks. And some people think that sounds crazy. The crowds that are showing up, I mean, here's a guy that the mainstream media has written off. It's old news. Mitt Romney's the nominee. Why is this guy? And Newt Gingrich, why are they even still in the race? Ron Paul has throngs of people. We saw that in Texas with, thousands showing up in all the different stops he had. In California, the same thing. I think it was 8,500 at UCLA. This is insane, and I mean that in the best way. What's going on here? You would think at the bare minimum that would be a news story. Forget about a media that's written Ron Paul off. Don't you think that they would wonder, hey, why is this guy still attracting such a large audience, a young audience, such a passionate and enthusiastic audience? But no, they don't ask those questions. And the answer to that is Ron Paul represents something that is far more important than whatever establishment figure ends up in charge at the end of this game. And that's what the people at these rallies recognize. They represent a new electorate that dismisses the politics of old. They know that their parents and grandparents, who for generations have voted Democrat or Republican, have grown government, have given us this debt, this entitlement system that's now bankrupt, have gotten us involved in so many wars, many of which didn't make any sense and further bankrupted us. They see that system as broken. They see Ron Paul as a way out of that, a new day, a new hope, if you will, not to get too Star Wars on you.
It's okay. We can do that here on the Robert Scott Bell Show.
New and refreshing and important and a promise.
Yes.
It's just a completely different outlook, and the idea that the mainstream media won't even touch it or look into it is pretty absurd.
Well, you can bet that if Mitt Romney or Newt Gingrich were drawing thousands of people at every stop, particularly at universities and even in Berkeley, of all places, where no one comes out for Republicans at Berkeley. I mean, there's a revolution on.
Well, that's exactly right. I can't remember the date, but I think it was one of Ron Paul's Texas stops was in San Antonio. Mitt Romney had an event the same day, and I think Ron Paul had like 3,000 or 4,000. Well, I'll have to go back and look. I get confused. There's so many people. So many stops. Anyways, it was a lot of people. It was a packed house. It was a standing room only. People in the lobby watching on closed circuit TV. I think Mitt Romney had like 100 people the same day.
Yes.
And here's the guy who is the presumptive nominee. You tell me what's going on, Robert. Is this not, forget about your politics, whether you're a Paul supporter or a Romney supporter or a Santorum or Gingrich, forget about all that stuff. Isn't that a story in and of itself worthy of coverage?
Well, you would think so. I mean, the crickets were chirping. I mean, listen, the headline, Romney draws dozens. I mean, come on.
Right. Well, what's happening here, and the reason I say I'm so encouraged, is there does seem to be a new electorate that is forming. Ron Paul is, some would say arguably, I would say not even arguably, and I say this as an old Pat Buchanan supporter, Ron Paul is the most conservative person to ever run for president of the United States. I'm throwing Goldwater and Reagan in that. I mean, he's in that mix.
Yes.
Very, extremely conservative in all the sort of limited government founding father sorts of ways that, that Goldwater-Reagan legacy that we recognize as American conservatism, while at the same time attracting independents in the same way Reagan did. People who don't think of themselves on the right or in the GOP love Ron Paul, and even some liberals who look at Obama and the Democrats and say, hey, this is just George W. Bush redo, and with foreign policy and civil liberties, it's even worse. than George W. Bush, with indefinite detention and all this other sort of craziness, the NDAA. You have all these people flocking to Ron Paul that I think represents something new, something we haven't seen in American politics in a long time as far as a generational and ideological shift. I think, whatever happens in 2012, and as you said, Ron Paul is going to be getting a lot more delegates. We've already seen that in Minnesota and Colorado within the last week than people are expecting. But rolling into Tampa, the future will be rolling into Tampa behind Ron Paul. What you see on that stage, what the establishment puts up there, is yesterday's news. I don't care what else happens in this election. That is as true as the day is long.
Yeah, that is the stunning thing, that all the rules that used to be basically, whether they were written or not, it was just the script that was played. Nobody questioned, or very few people questioned, what the media did or did not report. And if there was new media, it was fringed and marginalized to such a degree that very few paid attention to it. Now it's become more and more obvious through this, and we saw it 4 years ago when Ron was running then, even more obvious this time. But the difference is more people are ignoring mainstream media. I mean, they're literally going, we don't care if you cover it anymore. We're going. This is a whole new way. It's the unplugging and the reconnecting to the genuine source that I see that is. I'm excited like you are, Jack.
I am as well. I mean, part of my job as a conservative pundit, and I've been doing this, for, a long time now, is sort of, people on the right complain, Jack, why don't you beat up on liberals and the Democrats more? I say, well, we know they suck. We know they're terrible. What are we going to do to replace them? How are we going to counter it? How are we going to be the loyal opposition? So I point out where the Republican Party is not really living up to its limited government principles. Ron Paul supporters see that clearly. It's something their parents and grandparents, and I don't mean to make it completely generational, because every time I do this, I always have people in their 50s and 60s and 70s who are Paul supporters say, hey, hold up, Jack, and God bless them. But I think even they would agree with what I'm talking about, that so many of the older people in the Republican Party and the conservative movement are completely fine, for example, with a guy like Santorum or Gingrich, who spent a truckload of money when they were in power, as much, if not more, than the Democrats. Voted for things like No Child Left Behind, TARP, Gingrich being for the individual mandate. That's just an example of two supposedly conservative candidates who were acceptable for a significant period of time to your conventional Republicans as conservatives. Well, they're not even considered conservatives to Paul supporters. They're seen as big government Republicans, which is exactly what they are. There's not really that much difference between them and Romney. I'm encouraged, and this isn't about Gingrich or Santorum, those guys anymore, but it does give you perspective. It's about how the Paul supporters can sort of see through that, and that's moving into the future. These young people are forming their ideas about politics associated with Ron Paul at some of their most formative years. I don't know about you, Robert. I'm 37 years old. What I think about politics today had a lot to do with what I thought of at 19, 20, 21 when I was following Pat Buchanan around. And that's translated to today. I think we're seeing that now with this generation. These young people between 15 and 25, or wherever you want to stop at, under 30, who are starting to, maybe they were apathetic, maybe they were conservative, now they're a different kind of conservative, maybe they're a liberal and now they're not. Their ideas about politics, what's good and right, moving forward for this country, are being shaped by Ron Paul. How fantastic is that? And there are thousands of them. The people showing up at these rallies are only representative of a larger army that's out there, and it continues to grow. It's already double in size what Ron Paul was doing in 2008, and this thing is by no means over. It's really, really exciting.
Yeah, we're talking with Jack Hunter, official campaign blogger for the Ron Paul run for the presidency. We love him here and appreciate so much all that you're doing, and you're bringing that spark of youth to that campaign as well. And in fact, you're being out-youthed by the youth that are coming into that campaign, which is really cool. Only 37. I'm in my 40s, and we respect our elders here, but I respect even more the elders that understand what we're saying and that have signed on for this. In fact, my mom's 78. She's from Israel originally, Jack, and she is a Ron Paul delegate in Georgia. So it is happening.
I love hearing that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing as she's telling me all these stories about meeting these young kids, basically. Some college age, some just out of high school, turned 18 for the first time they can participate, and they are all over this. And they're saying, why is this old lady here, grandma here? And she tells them she loves liberty enough, and she's doing it for her kids and grandkids. And that's what we want to see. We need more of that. So that's inspiring others to say, yes, I may be old, I may have been on this planet long enough, but I want a good legacy to leave for my kids.
Well, and that's another aspect of the generational shift. The younger people don't see as much hope for the future with the system as it is, and their parents don't either, but they may be a little more reserved about getting away from it. For example, if you've been paying into Social Security and Medicare all your life, you want it, and rightfully so. That's your promise. If I'm 37, I don't think I'm going to see any of that stuff. I think it's going to be gone.
Oh, yeah,
so imagine if you're 25 or 20 years old. And also the foreign policy stuff. A lot of older conservatives just can't imagine in America where we're not in, 20 different countries at one time and carrying on a war, where the younger people are like, what's the point of this? What have we got out of it? Has it made us any safer? Has it made it more dangerous? And can we afford it? They don't have those old attachments that some of their parents have, and that's what enables them to be more limited government, more for actually cutting spending, more for actually securing this country, depending on your perspective. And that's the key. They're going to be able to do things that their parents and grandparents just wouldn't put up with. I always tell people, if you wonder why, Republicans can take control of the House or Senate or the executive branch at various times, but government keeps getting bigger, look no further than the Republican Party establishment. That's all you need to look at. Forget the Democrats. We know what they are. We know what they're going to do. They don't even lie to us. They're going to spend a bunch of money. Every speech Obama gives is about he's going to do this and he's going to do that, and boy, do they do it. We know what they are. The problem is we haven't had a Republican Party that's the opposite of that.
No, we
haven't.
Long
time, if ever.
Yeah, and let's be fair to some degree. The progressives are starting to abandon Obama, as well as they're starting to see the warnings that Ron Paul has been stating about both parties, and particularly Obama being even worse, if that could be possible, on the issue of war, on the issue of civil liberties here at home, selecting Americans potentially for targeted assassination, much less coming out of the NDAA and worse. His attacks continually on medical marijuana or cannabis, freedom to utilize the plants of creation. I mean, in so many ways, we see the so-called old left, old right, however you want to call it, now looking and going, both of these parties suck, y'all.
Well, that's exactly right, Robert. Just like any self-respecting conservative can't get excited about Mitt Romney, and to their credit, the GOP base has not been excited about Mitt Romney. Any self-respecting progressive who's all on board with Barack Obama is a hypocrite. And like you said, many of them who, they're progressives because they have integrity. We might not agree with them on every issue, but on the issues that count, that are important to progressives, Obama's a disaster. Everything they hated about George W. Bush, civil liberties, indefinite detention, a foreign policy, all this sort of warrantless wiretapping, Obama's continued that in spades and even increased it. Look at something as horrible as the Patriot Act. Arresting people, indefinite detention, no trial, nothing like that. Well, Obama has one up George W. Bush. Now you can arrest American citizens indefinitely and without trial. And as I find it amusing and encouraging, it's sort of become a conservative consensus, even within the mainstream, that the NDAA is a bad idea. Well, I know an awful lot of progressives who think the same thing. Hey, let's work together. And guess what, folks? There's a candidate who represents us, both of our perspectives on that right now, running for president. So I'm really encouraged about the different coalitions that could be built in the future.
I was thinking, based on what Obama has done, in case Ron Paul doesn't get the nomination of the Republican Party, go ahead and run Obama as a Republican.
Yeah, what's the difference, right?
Yeah,
George W. Obama.
Yeah, I mean that is the point here, and I think, like you said, to be honest about this, we could talk politics of personality, but you don't even have to. Whether you like Obama or not as a person is irrelevant. It's like, look at what he's done, and some would say, well, it's his first 4 years, but he'll be better in the second. When do you go? Well, what the guy has done is what he's done, and that ain't right. And that's what we're going to talk about some more after this break. Jack Hunter's on for one more segment here. It is about time, Jack. We're happy to have you back on board. More news on the Ron Paul campaign you won't hear anywhere else in the media, but right here on the Robert Scott Bell Show after this.
The Robert Scott Bell Show. The Robert Scott Bell Show.
Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That's the definition of insanity. If you're going to vote for an establishment Republican or an establishment Democrat, I would argue that is grounds for insanity, even though I'm not a guy who would drug you. I would detoxify you from that. That's what we're doing right now with Jack Hunter, the official campaign blogger for the Ron Paul campaign for the presidency. Jack, it is great to have you on board.
Good to be with you always, Robert.
So if we're going to make the difference, if we're going to make the change, one of the things we got to do is counter the silence, if we will, from the old media. That's what we do here. That's why I'm encouraging everybody to pay attention to the alternate sources, because they're the ones actually on the ground seeing what's happening, reporting on it, and pumping you up with energy and excitement for what's really happening like you're seeing, Jack.
We're already countering it. Look, part of the Ron Paul phenomenon is that it's taking place in the internet age. It's hard to imagine a lot of this stuff. It's sort of like the revolutions we see in the Middle East start on Facebook and Twitter. So much of the organization and the force behind Ron Paul takes place online. We are circumventing the old media, what many call the dead tree press, or the old newspapers and the old official arbiters of what's respectable opinion. Whether it's CBS News or ABC and Fox and MSNBC and it's all these different things. We can say what we want now. We can go online, we can talk to each other, and they can't, like this stuff happening with all these people coming to see Ron Paul. It's out there. People know about it. They're just not reporting on it. It's not like it's a mystery. You can see it anywhere online. If you're on Facebook or something, chances are some of your friends or family are Ron Paul people. You see it right there. We are circumventing the old media. They can't determine what we can and cannot talk about anymore like they used to. We saw this really early in the campaign. Do you remember when Ron Paul almost won the Ames straw poll?
Yes.
He lost to Michelle Bachmann by less than 200 votes. And Jon Stewart did that great lampooning of the mainstream media, asking if Ron Paul had become the 13th floor in a hotel.
Right.
Well, that's exactly right. They decided that, the mainstream media, that the big-time players at that time were Michelle Bachmann, Rick Perry, Mitt Romney, and Tim Pawlenty. And, Ron Paul almost beat Bachmann, but they didn't care. It wasn't part of their narrative, so they ignored it. Jon Stewart sort of shamed them into it in his own comic way. We're still sort of there. Ron Paul is still there. That movement is still there. Those people are still there. And people are going to know it one way or another, whether the mainstream media establishment wants them to or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And those of you who'd like to read more about what's happening there, that what they call the Political Ticker with Jack Hunter is available at ronpaul2012.com to the blogs. I've got a direct link up at robertscottbell.com with the show notes today, as well as his link up to the southernavenger.com, where he's been opining, so to speak, for many years, writing and also video YouTube versions of it. You can follow, you can sign up there. Great stuff. Last one you did about 10 days ago, you did on Obamacare and the imaginary Constitution. What was that all about?
Well, Nancy Pelosi, when Obamacare was pushed through, that she was asked, where does the Constitution give the federal government the power to regulate or mandate health care? She said, are you serious? And she was being honest. Her idea, Barack Obama's idea of what's constitutional, is what they think is a good idea, not what's in the document. Conservatives are just as guilty of that. Somebody like Bachmann or others will call themselves constitutional conservatives, but yet they still support the Patriot Act. Now, whether you think the Patriot Act is a good idea, like Obama and Nancy Pelosi think Obamacare is a good idea, is secondary to the fact that the Patriot Act violates the Fourth Amendment explicitly. It does. Whether you think it's useful or not useful or good or bad, forget about that. It's not constitutional. So this imaginary constitution that exists in the mind of some on the left and some on the right is just what they think is a good idea. Well, the founding fathers knew that, government, by its very nature, would always be coming up with all sorts of schemes and programs and other good ideas that would inevitably lead to a state too large to manage, too centralized, and too tyrannical. That's the reason they created the Constitution. So the argument should always be whether something's constitutional or not before we say whether it's a good idea or not. My idea of a good idea is not the same as Barack Obama's and vice versa, and that's why we have a Constitution to, keep me or him or anybody else in power from doing these sorts of things that are outside of what we should be doing. I think it's very instructive to always look at this from a left or right perspective because, as I said earlier, government keeps getting bigger no matter who is in the White House, what party is in control. We saw it with Bush, we're seeing it with Obama. You can damn well be sure if there's a President Romney, you're going to see it all over again, and the Democrat after that, the Republican after that. You need a different kind of leader. That's why these people are flocking to Ron Paul. It is a new electorate, it is a new day, it is a new type of politics. It is coming whether people like it or not.
And Yogi Berra was right. It ain't over till it's over, and it ain't over. Jack Hunter is also instrumental in helping to write the Tea Party Goes to Washington with Senator Rand Paul. And, of course, there's a lot going on there with the Tea Party, the hijacking and co-opting. I saw a video on YouTube that, Adam Kokesh, you know the Adam Kokesh, and he was interviewing a candidate, a Republican so-called Tea Party candidate for treasurer of North Carolina. And he sounded good at the beginning of this thing. He was going, yeah, we got to get out of the UN, Agenda 21. You're thinking, okay, he could be a good guy. Then suddenly, Adam asked him about the Fed, and it just goes all to hell there. Suddenly it's like defending the Fed. Oh, they don't print money out of thin air. Oh, no. And we see that what you wrote about with Rand about the Tea Party going to Washington, somebody went back to the Tea Party and just kind of diluted it into almost nothing.
Well, I wouldn't say that about. Are you talking about the movement in general that it's been diluted? I mean,
I'm certainly not talking. I'm not talking about Rand Paul because he's been holding fast to the principle in the Senate. But the Tea Party that kind of sprung up, these spontaneous kind of revolutions, somehow they got co-opted. A lot of them, and they don't even know about the Fed anymore.
Well, there was just one guy, too, and some of them do, some of them don't, but that was always the case. Look, the Tea Party is a populist movement, like the Vietnam War protesters in the 60s. Any populist movement is a big damn mess. Yes. Now, it's a necessary mess. That's what populist movements are all about. Are there people in the Tea Party who are running around saying they want to cut spending and support the Constitution and want to end the Fed, and then they look at Newt Gingrich and think he's a great guy? Sure. Now, they haven't put all those contradictions together yet. Are there other people who think that's just silly? Yes, there are. I will say to the credit of the grassroots base and the GOP, they jumped very quickly from candidate to candidate in this race. Maybe they weren't comfortable with Ron Paul's foreign policy, but as quickly as they were with Michelle Bachmann and then Herman Cain and Santorum Gingrich, the reason they kept jumping is because they knew what you and I know glaringly, that all of these candidates' records really don't measure up from the Tea Party perspective. Yes. I think 5 or 10 years ago that base would have settled a lot quicker. So I think that is encouraging moving forward. There weren't really, except for Ron Paul, any Tea Party candidates for them to choose from.
No, that is
Rand Paul or Ron or Mike Lee or whoever you want to look at. And so it was sort of, they were confused.
Yeah, well, you're right. Confusion is there. The populist movement, as you said, of any of them can be confusing a lot. And, of course, the picking out of who's the spokesperson out there, typically the old media is not going to dig down below the surface, and they're going to make some claims like this. So I'm glad to have some insight from you because you were there almost at the beginning in putting this thing out there. So what are these next phases? We've still got states to go. There's still delegates being counted, even in the states that have already had their so-called primaries or caucuses. So, as I said, this thing is not over. You're confirming that right here on the Robert Scott Bell Show.
Oh, absolutely. We're rolling into Tampa, and as I said earlier, and everybody suspects, and there's what they suspect is correct, we're going to have a lot more delegates than what the media is reporting right now and what the establishment expects. People were surprised in Colorado and Minnesota. We're having a lot of teaming up with Santorum supporters who, despite disagreements between our candidate and theirs, they know that Romney doesn't measure up. They want conservative representation in the Republican Party, and they're joining forces with us. That's going to be an interesting dynamic in these states where we already have strong organizations and our people on the ground, and those delegates will be going to Tampa. It's going to be an interesting time indeed.
Yeah, we do live in interesting times, that's for sure. And I think the delegitimizing of the establishment of both parties is something that is moving forward in earnest, and the Ron Paul campaign has been the most powerful force I've seen, certainly in my lifetime. I grew up in Georgia in the Carter years and watched the transition to Reagan and saw all the amazing things happen, but I didn't get to the depth of understanding until I started looking at what Ron had been saying since the 70s, since Nixon closed the gold window. That motivated him to get into politics simply because he saw the impending disaster that seemingly very few others saw. Certainly in politics, they only saw the ability to spend and plunder. Who cares what happens tomorrow? And even now, with very few exceptions in Congress, the Senate, and even among many Republicans, with a few exceptions, they still think they can spend and someone else will deal with it later.
That's right. I've said about Mitt Romney, this is the campaign season when they're supposed to be lying to us and promising, oh, I'll cut this and I'll cut that. He's not even promising us that during the lying part of the there's no cuts in his budget. There's going to be more money. So what do you expect him to do once he gets in office? Look, Newt Gingrich, Mitt Romney, even President Obama, they are running campaigns. Ron Paul is running a presidential campaign as well, but he's the only one running a revolution. That is going to bear fruit more in the long term than anything else going on right now. All these other figures will be a glitch in the history books compared to what Ron Paul is doing.
Well, Jack Hunter, it is always a great pleasure when we get you on. I know how busy you are, spending all over the country on this, and you are a big part of this revolution, have been even prior to joining the Ron Paul campaign. With your passion, your humor, you inspire people, you anger some, which we do here sometimes too. We can't help it, but our passion is just let loose, and I appreciate you coming on board to help us set the stage for what's yet to come. It is not over. Ron Paul 2012.
Always good to be with you, Robert. Let's push forward, and things are going to be even more exciting, I promise.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Jack. And, of course, the revolution continues here as it does every day, much less the Healing Revolution Fridays, which Jack Hunter just rocked in a great and happy political way, because the politics we discuss here is about bringing people together, honestly. Even though sometimes, I get upset when I hear these politicians sacrifice children at the Church of Modern Medicine, biological mysticism. But that is not what Ron Paul as a physician has ever done, nor would he do as president. So we're talking about restoring freedom. We're restoring liberty here. I realize there are some of our friends and neighbors out there and loved ones and family members that are a little bit afraid of freedom. They think it doesn't work. They wrongly say that unless the government intervenes, it'll be all hell will break loose. But the reality is all hell is already broken loose as our federal government no longer operates within the confines or the bounds of the Constitution. Therefore, it exists in a state of virtual anarchy. And so those who want order are actually defending anarchy right now by saying, we need an establishment, we need more Obama, we need more Romney, whatever, we need Bush Part 3, whatever. They're actually arguing for more anarchy. And I like to see order. Now, order by the force of a gun, we recognize some people need that force to be kept in check. But are you willing to put yourself in prison so that others don't abuse the liberty that God has given them? You have a right and obligation to defend yourself, as the founding fathers and framers of the Constitution established and gave limited authority to the government to provide for basic things, including and especially to secure the blessings of liberty on all of us, on our posterity. And that's what we're here to do, among many things, on the Robert Scott Bell Show. So thank you for being here. We've got one more segment to wrap it up. Oh, my gosh, we might have to talk about anger. Anybody really angry? I heard a guy named Mel is very angry. Also, a little bit more about Dick Clark. Could he have lived to 102? Stand by. We'll find out after this.
Tired of the same boring health talk radio? Then turn up the volume and break off the knob. This is the Robert Scott Bell Show.